Hello and welcome. I'm Shi-An Costello, and I'm with Francis Yoon. We're going to be giving a preview event today, preview discussion surrounding the upcoming Keymore Festival for contemporary keyboard and piano music. And so Francis is a longtime friend of mine. He is a wonderful keyboardist, harpsichordist, composer as well, and educator. And he is currently living in Virginia. And I am here in Chicago. I'm also a keyboardist and composer, and I will be basically facilitating this discussion today as a preview, like I said, for the Keymore Festival. And we are both very deeply involved in the festival itself. I am the artistic director and curator for the festival this year and hopefully for years to come. And Francis is one of the performers in the upcoming festival and also on the advisory board and possibly going to be parts of other aspects of the festival as it continues to grow and become a full-on organization. And another smaller side note is we've been, friends for a pretty long time. How long has it been, Francis?
It's been a long time. We were both younger.
It was a time when we were both younger. Yes.
It was a time. I think decade might be over a decade, actually. Yeah, over a decade.
Over a decade, yeah. So today I want to talk to you, Francis, about about what you do as a keyboardist, your practice, and I guess on the broadest level, how you think about music. And I think through that, the keyboard will kind of just come out as an important instrument in all of it. But I think to start as broad as possible, I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, having training as a pianist, training as a harpsichordist, and really in like so many different contexts for those instruments, how do you conceive of music in terms of where its place is in time? Like there's obviously sort of a chronological order to everything. Certain things are before others and later than others, but how do you sort of like grapple with that? Because we're always kind of taking in music from all different periods of time and written for different instruments, intended for different instruments. And we're doing that all right now in our lifetime, and we have access to that. So I just was wondering, how do you navigate that for yourself?
That's a really great question that I'm afraid I'm going to have a really bad answer, which is I don't really think about that much, because no matter when the music's written, we're hearing it now, and how we hear it now sort of matters more to me than what place it had then. However, that doesn't mean that, like, when I'm working on something old, I kind of want to know everything that there is to know about it. When it was written, what instrument it was written for, who the composer was, what the composer's status was. That kind of informs how I hear the music, right? And it kind of lets me imagine how that music might have been heard at the time. But there is no way of proving that. And I think that's the joy of playing music, is that you take all that information, you take the actual history part of it, and you kind of filter that in your own lens, and the performance kind of lives, and then it dies. And I think that's great. That's the thing
Right.
that I like about live music in that way. So yeah, I'm sorry. That was a very lame answer.
No, it's awesome. I was thinking of it from, when you're saying how you you have to see it through your own lens, like as a person living now, and
Yeah.
sort of thinking back to whenever that maybe older music was written, because that seems to be what we're talking about now. I mean, it could be for music written now, but just in a different
Well,
place by
I
someone
think
I don't know.
I sort of so I just recently performed a piece by you, Shi-An Costello. It's a piece that you wrote for me called For Harpsichord. But I know exactly why you wrote that for me, in what context. I can even tell a story about how I basically locked you in a harpsichord practice room in Michigan, and you just basically sketched out this piece. And then a week later, I get this piece. But going back to it now, 8 years later, it was a different piece. And I remember all this stuff, and it was all important how you wrote it, what you did, how I might have played it, because I gave the first performance of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remembered all that, and I knew all that, and in a way, it didn't matter because I had to like interpret it through who I am now.
Right. It
If
like
that makes
matters, but
sense.
it doesn't matter, right?
It
Is there
matters in that. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, is there a point where, so it is interesting when we like think about it from that perspective. And obviously this is me and you thinking of a past self, but you could be researching like some other composer that you don't know or have never met, and from a different time. Do you feel like that information actually seeps into your performance in the end? Or is it kind of like just a way to almost like have a healthy balance of like procrastination, like a healthy balance that just like kind of separates you a little bit from the notes so that you're not like looking at it myopically, like when you look at something too close you can't actually see what it is. This kind of gives you a chance to like healthily step back or healthily procrastinate the myopic focus on the notes themselves, like, or does it actually like get into your performance? Because that, I mean, and who knows what the answer is, but like you're saying, because it's interesting, you're saying two kind of contrasting things, like it's important, I love to know everything I can, but also like it doesn't really matter.
Uh, so yes, I wouldn't call it a procrastination. I think what it is what I'm learning when I'm doing all this research is how does this person communicate, right? Because all music is communication, and how a composer communicates changes century to century, or even country to country, or you know, town by town, right? So in a way, it's making me learn how that composer communicates. So, for example, right now I'm practicing a suite by Gaspard Leroux, who is a 17th century, 18th century, early 18th century French keyboard composer. And they communicate in a very set, standard way, right? And there's very clear, like, primary source evidence of this is how they played it, and then these are the dance forms, right? And these are the phrases of the dance. So it's really important for me to know that, because if I didn't know that and I just approached it as if I were approaching Schumann, well, I think I would lose a lot of the meaning of Gaspard Leroux that you wouldn't just get from the notes. Same thing like when I was practicing your piece, Shi-An Costello. I was going by, you write it, right? It's a very free piece in that it's not measured in any way. And one of the directions is that you let your musicality guide, right? The piece. And I know from knowing you just how much I can stretch that. So very often when I feel like, oh man, this needs to move a little bit, I know your direction to me was actually you can just kind of live in that moment longer than you think. And that's important because that's
Was
how
that
you'll
direction?
communicate.
Yeah, was that direction given to you? I actually don't remember. I can't even
Actually,
remember.
I distinctly remember when I was learning For Harpsichord, and I played it for you the first time back in 2014.
Mhm.
You told me, actually, this could go much slower than you're doing it, right? And for me, that was kind of a surprise going. It just kind of made me think about the piece differently, if that makes sense, right?
Totally.
I don't have that luxury with Gaspard Leroux, but there's a lot of primary source evidence of how French Baroque people played and thought about music.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and actually, more importantly, thought about dance, because this is a dance suite. So I can go that, and I know all this information, and I use that to kind of organize the notes.
Did Leroux's music, would Leroux's music help you play For Harpsichord, the piece I wrote?
I think in a way, because like I said, For Harpsichord is a very free piece. It's very, there are a couple of measures here and there, but there's not really time signatures, right? You drew a couple of bar lines here and there. And I actually said this the first time that I saw it. It's actually, if not musically related, spiritually related to a 17th century French Baroque unmeasured prelude, where an unmeasured prelude would look like a whole bunch of whole notes to us with lines going over. It's completely, it looks like a graphic score.
Mm-hmm.
But as you filter through it, you see, oh, this is the harmony, and the lines are actually telling you things about the harmony. And then, oh, these notes, even though they look like equal whole notes, are actually kind of like, you know, they sound really cool if you bunch them together so you can play them really fast. But this section actually feels a little bit more expansive. Oh, here's a cadence right there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm using all that kind of musical knowledge to interpret a piece that looks like it has no rhythm. And same thing for you. I'm seeing these lines, you wrote some notes, and I know that you were thinking about a phrase. There was a phrase there that's not necessarily 100% readily apparent from how it's notated. And I will try to find that phrase. Whether or not
older music too.
Right? Exactly. And whether or not you actually intended what I thought was a phrase to be a phrase, then that's when it doesn't matter.
Right.
Because it's what's convincing as a performance.
Exactly. Right. You might find something in there that I didn't see.
Yeah.
I didn't really consciously see. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to think of it. Yeah, I guess this kind of leads to like another thought that I was having, because everything kind of cross-pollinates itself, right? When you're doing old music versus new music. I was just wondering what you think of this, because I always see a lot of, this is actually sort of a genesis of our friendship, I think, was around kind of talking about classical music in terms of bookends. In terms of the repertoire, the bookends would obviously be like the earliest of early music, and then the most recent current music. And that was kind of where our sort of passions lied, even then, over a decade ago. And I always see a lot of modernism in older music, or whatever modernism might mean. I see a lot of innovation and, I guess, trendiness, for lack of a better way to say it, in old music. And then I also see a lot of really clear, really clear references to older music in contemporary music. It's impossible, like if you just have a couple notes, like if you had a piano piece that just had, I have a piano here, so I might as well. you're going to hear Moonlight Sonata, and like most people will hear that, especially if you have like a C sharp in the bass or something. And so, you know, those reference points are there in our ears. It's in our sort of like consciousness. So our sort of collective consciousness, whether you're thinking about it or not. So my question to you is, and it's a big question. Do you feel like music, in terms of aesthetics and trends and sort of styles, does it progress? Is it progressing forward, or is it kind of like revolving around different sort of orbits that return back to what it was before?
Yeah, that is a very big question, and
you have 5 minutes to answer it.
Oh, great! What happens?
We're running out of time. Quick.
Oh God. I don't.
Stay tuned, everyone. We'll be back.
You're gonna thank me for that pause and edit it.
Oh, it's just staying in there. No.
Oh, it's staying in. Okay.
Like once you say you're gonna edit out the thing, you have to leave it in.
Exactly.
I'd like to actually take it out. You know.
You're absolutely right. I don't believe in progression in art, which can sound like a very controversial statement, but I don't think it is. I think art, when it was created as a product of its time, and it served a function for that time. When that time ended, artists did different things that suited their times. They were inspired by what might have come in the time before, but they took what they liked most about the art from before, and they used that to build what was suited for their time. And this is not an original thought. I think it's a Harold Bloom thought, who is a literary critic. Right? That's really, I think, what happens all the time. Right? And then the new artists always say, oh, well, the old guys were doing this, but now we're doing this, and now we've progressed. I think that progression narrative is false. I think what happens is what's always happened is, here's this thing, society at that time liked to hear that thing. That era ends, society moves on, they like to hear different things. That's related to what, also that it's intelligible, it's related to what came before, but it kind of does something different because it's suited to their new time, right? So I think everything goes around in circles, is really what I'm trying to say. Because what happens, I think, and this is a very anecdotal way of saying it, is, okay, the generation immediately after tries to do something completely different from what came before them. And to inspire them, they tend to go way back and use that to inspire what they're doing. And suddenly what's old becomes new again. Or I've discovered this independently of not knowing that someone else did that hundreds of years earlier.
So that sense of discovery is so important, obviously, to good art, right? And like something that is that kind of catches your interest, right? That sense of discovery. So yeah, and you're getting at something that's really interesting to me, because I guess the question that I would ask is, since you have to have that sense of discovery with art, and if sort of your idea that it kind of keeps circling back around to something older that you reference, how do we feel like it's new when it's not? Is it because people just forgot it was there? Like in 2000 years, if someone wrote the exact same chord progression and like starting point as Moonlight Sonata, but Moonlight Sonata had been forgotten by society, would we have that sense of discovery again, and would it feel new? Is that kind of what you feel like happens? or is there actually like newness that is being dreamt up every day in current times? Or is it just always something that someone didn't realize was already there? Does that make sense?
Yes and no. I think what I'm going to say is newness is, of course, always there, right? I think it's impossible for anyone to sit down and write the Moonlight Sonata exactly as it was written. And I think it's partly because whoever's going to try to write a new Moonlight Sonata is not Beethoven, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are all...
the context itself is not going to allow that to happen.
Exactly. And we are all products of our influences, products of our culture. And even if I were to sit at a piano and start off a piece with that C sharp minor arpeggio, like that's very distinctive of a Moonlight Sonata, I think it would lead me somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. And that is partly kind of, I think, the fact that there's so many songs and so many pieces that use the same exact chord progression but sound completely different, right? Mm-hmm. Because different people wrote it. We recognize the similarity because, again, like if you're a 19th century Italian composer, then you're probably going to sound like a 19th century Italian composer. Just like right now, if you're a 21st century rapper, you're going to sound like a 21st century rapper because there's been a common language that everyone is using to kind of define what that genre is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So individuality creates newness.
Right. I'm glad you specified it, because I think it can be kind of sort of discouraging for people trying to find something new or innovative in music without that caveat, right? Of course, saying that things kind of go through, it's more cyclical or circular, you could say, I guess, versus progressive. History keeps going back and repeating itself, finding new iterations of what it already has done. But with that caveat that the context, the times, the circumstances change, I will never write a harpsichord piece like that again, because I don't think, a lot of things contribute to that. In hindsight, I drove like 6 hours from Chicago in one go, kind of late at night. And then I was like in a practice room. I had like 24 hours, 48 hours, I can't remember, a day or two, access to an instrument. I wanted to chill out and like have something more like chill after like driving a lot. All those things actually make something, special in that moment, right? Mm-hmm. And like the act of composing too, as well as the act of performing, it's really similar. Every performance is special too.
Exactly.
And if you think of composition as a performance for just that you do by yourself, basically, it is just as special and unique. So that's cool that this, like, I'm glad that you like explained that really clearly, so that there's this sort of, so that it's clear that yes, things repeat itself, but there is still always discovery and innovation and newness that can always be uncovered. And I like to have that approach too. I'm not sure if it's true, but I think it's the most positive, like exciting way for me to, as a creator, to be like, oh yeah, no, there's stuff still out there,
I mean, there's stuff, the discovery stuff. Look, I'm not really, I composed a little bit, but I wouldn't really call myself a composer. That was a very generous introduction. But my favorite parts of when I'm figuring something out is that I've figured something out. Like there's a solution that I've sort of discovered. A lot of times that solution, you go, oh, someone kind of did that.
Yeah.
But the fact that you discovered it through the process, that the material that you came up with led to this solution, is the joy of it. It's not necessarily the originality of that solution. It's that solution was perfect for that time. for the problem that I was working through in the composition. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's important that you did it.
Exactly. That you discovered something. That's what matters. That's where I think where the excitement comes from. Because I think if you go back to Beethoven, you can actually trace a lot of his techniques to, this and this and this. Haydn, for example, did a lot of things that Beethoven did. The whole idea of bringing back an element of the third movement in a fourth movement, like Beethoven famously did in the Fifth Symphony, Haydn did in like Symphony 46 or something, right? That idea by itself is not original, but I think we remember the Beethoven because the way Beethoven solved the problem, how that solution worked in the Fifth Symphony was, it had a very good dramatic compositional effect. So the solution itself wasn't original, but the context was really original, if that makes sense. So that's why I think we remember the Beethoven more than we remember that Haydn did it first.
Right. I have a question for you on that front because I do think you're
done.
The end. You're going to cut this off.
Yes.
The interview off. I'm sorry to offend with you so deeply. I don't know where I went wrong, but somewhere along the way, must have said something. But yeah, in terms of composition and being a composer, like a young composer, especially like emerging composer, I felt, I don't know what I would call myself, but I'm, 35 years old. But when I was younger, I kind of wanted to get into music by being a composer before I figured out that the piano was really cool to play. And I wonder what your thought is too, because I do think you're a composer, and it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on this too. When I was younger, I kind of had to sort of like pretend like I'm discovering something new whenever I was writing music, just to allow myself the space to create music and get to know my own like musical sensibilities and my own ideas. Because when you're young, you're like always having that discovery that someone else did it, that you didn't know did it, and they did it like so well, and like your whole thing that you're so excited about is actually like really played out. And it's a very like humbling, constantly like very discouraging in the sense of wanting to be innovative, let's put it that way. I think so when I was younger, I just remember having that feeling like in the moment, always in the moment, that I'm like doing something really cool, and I'm doing something that might have never been done before. But then immediately after I finish what I'm doing, pick up the pieces, realize, oh yeah, okay, then this is just fitting into place here in that way. I think now my relationship to composing is quite different from that. But what are your thoughts on that? Because a lot of young composers, I think, have that feeling that they want to do something new and innovative, but they're also younger and not completely like well-versed on what's been done, just formally speaking, like just knowing like the names and places of things and what happened. And then they discovered along the way, after they are like independently, more or less independently discovered it on their own, that same thing.
I think that speaks to a lot of, there's something that I really don't like about how we talk about history and innovation. And it's the whole idea of the great man inventing an idea. And that kind of discounts the fact that a lot of people discover the same thing independently of each other. And because you discover something that someone else discovered, with copyright law, of course, now that gets more complicated, right? You're suddenly plagiarizing when really you're not, right? You're working within by the way, this doesn't mean that I'm advocating plagiarism. I'm not. I'm just saying that a lot of times, given the language of music that we've inherited, you'll discover the same thing that someone else discovered. independently and not, you're not stealing someone else's work. It just happens that the solutions are the same, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just going to add in one quick little thing, Francis, because I feel like you might, I feel personally that there's a little bit of a collective knowledge. And sometimes even if you think you discover completely on your own, it might have seeped in another way from like some other way. So I do think there is something about that where like, you know, like in sports, when someone breaks a record for like something and it had been done, it gets broken a bunch of times after that. Like the sort of like humanity kind of like, we're all together and we kind of sort of, I don't know. So anyway, that's a real side note, but go ahead.
I mean, I understand that there might be a collective now, and I was sort of acknowledging that in that we're, if you're writing a piece of tonal music, the language of tonal music has sort of been set, right? There's a way that we hear tonal music that is, that there's a grammar, right? So, where does composition begin and where does set grammatical rules begin, right? Because we expect some form of cadence, right? We're not inventing our cadences if we're writing perfect, you know, a tonal music. That's sort of where I'm going with that. I think acknowledges your collective knowledge point, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you're right. There might be the times when you are kind of stealing and you don't realize that you are actually stealing, right? That gets very complicated. Going back to your original question, I was never a young composer. I only really started composing kind of like close to when I was age 30. I was in my late 20s when I started composing, because for me, it was, I had to get over the fact that I had permission to compose. Which sounds weird, but if you come up in a classical training system, well, the great composers are the great composers and you can't touch that. So what's the point? And you're just going to write lesser music.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And I actually would say there's a little bit of that sort of, you know, almost religious devotion to the great men of history. I would say even when you're a comp major, there's a little bit of that.
But we can take all these things that we've been saying, of all these materials, and we've all discovered the same thing, and we can just change our thinking around it. And I think that's really what kind of opened the gates for me, that kind of gave me the permission to compose, is not to look at it, oh, oh my God, someone's already done this. So many centuries of composers have done this. Oh, century of composers have done the circle of fifth sequence, right? What am I going to add? And just change that to, oh my God, so many composers have done this. Like, I'm swimming in the same pool as you guys.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And
like we're all on the same
boat here. You did this to solve the problem, and I can use that as an example to solve my problem. And this is great. It's sort of like talking back. It's like being in dialogue with the older composers, and acknowledging their greatness, because I love Beethoven. I do. I love Beethoven. And I will gladly steal any solution that Beethoven made, right? Yeah. And be okay with that, because I'm like, you know what? Beethoven stole it from Haydn.
Right.
Or Beethoven stole it from Handel.
Yeah, right? I think that's great. It's communal. I think, and I do think that, you know, you mentioned the sort of the great man narrative, great man theory, or whatever you want to call it. In case people don't know what that is, I think, to my understanding, it's sort of thinking of history through single people, usually men, that like did a thing that's super individualistically special and that changed the rest of the world around them, versus them being sort of like in dialogue with the world around them. It sounds silly, but it's like, that's kind of the problem with it. And I think the way you're thinking of it is so healthy and makes more sense to me. I like thinking of it that way because it makes you part of the community of composers throughout history, versus being in a sort of competitive, antipathetic sort of way. Like, oh, they did that, that's their thing, so I'm going to do this. Or, there's more of like, hey, we're all doing stuff, and like let's learn from each other and grow together, as a community of people. I think it's cool to actually extend that. I don't think of it that way that much, actually, honestly, but it's really cool that you extend it to the past, like to people who are making music from a different time, different place. I think of it more for people alive with me now, or people I know, or but it's true. Where there's sort of it's almost like ancestors.
It's almost like ancestors, but it's also like, again, you're swimming in the same pool, and you might be drinking some of the same water, right? I don't know. That sounded cooler in my head, but you understand my point. But there's also,
we're all swimming in the same pool and
yes,
fighting with
we're
the same
all
noodles.
swimming and peeing in the same pool, and all mixes together.
And we're all drinking from the same, just like so many weird metaphors.
Yes, we're all drinking each other's urine. What?
Beethoven's urine lives with us to this day. What? In terms of the nerdier aspects of playing, technique-wise, of the harpsichord and the piano, what are some of the changes in the approach, like physiologically, that you have to go through when you're switching between those two instruments?
I think what I like to think about is, how does the instrument speak? The harpsichord speaks in a very direct way, and in a way in which you can feel the moment before it speaks, in that you can feel the tension of the string on the plug. And that's all you're doing, is you feel that, you exert enough force to do that, all right? The way you approach the key and how you leave the key, also really important in well, I think it's important in all keyboard playing. But I specifically really started thinking about it when I play harpsichord, is how you leave the key is just as important as how you approach the key. And how you do that is determined by what kind of gesture do you want to make. So do you want to make a nice soft ba and have a nice rounded ending? Well, you have a slow approach and a slow release. Mm-hmm. How you approach and release slowly obviously will change depending on the instrument. With piano, the speaking mechanism, you don't feel the speaking mechanism. You just don't. You just kind of press it down and it goes blunk. Right?
It's a smoother, just kind of like you sail into the note a little smoother. I'm not a harpsichordist, for full disclosure, so that people listening. But in terms of the piano, I feel like there's a bounciness to it. You can feel the bounce of the hammer coming back. And, so for people who don't know, the harpsichord is plucking the string, and it's like building the tension that Francis is talking about right before you play, because you're actually kind of like winding up for the pluck, right? More or less.
Sure, yeah.
Versus a piano, the hammers are all resting, away from the keys, and then you press the key so that the hammer just goes right into it and bounces away from it immediately. Yeah. And so that bounce is something I feel and hear when playing the piano, and it helps me for sure, especially depending on what kind of music you're playing. Do you have any kind of bounce in the harpsichord, or is it more about the pluck, the tension, the pluck, and then the release?
It's always the pluck.
Right.
You ride the pluck, I've been told. You're writing the pluck. And that's really all you're thinking about. And how you pluck is what the sound. What I think about is, and this is the essential difference between Baroque music and Romantic music. Romantic music is sung. So we're talking about long legatos, and you need some consonants to understand it, but the consonants should fall under the long line overrules the consonant, if that makes sense. Baroque music is spoken. Even when it's sung, it's spoken. So it's a little bit shorter phrases. The consonants are very important. And so you can have a hard consonant, right? Versus a b or a d. And I think you really get, if you really practice hard enough and think long enough about this stuff, I think you can really distinguish when a person is really thinking a p versus a b, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of the inflection and a lot of the quote unquote dynamics come from, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. The articulation of consonants versus, I guess, vowel sounds or something.
And this goes back to what I said earlier, is that harpsichord was perfectly suited for the music of its time because it was a more spoken style, right? Pianos became more prevalent because the music moved away to longer lines and more beautiful sung long phrases, right? Which the harpsichord, right? That's not what the harpsichord does very well. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I think, there's a lot of, everything's done obviously now in contemporary music, right? But there is, a lot of that kind of hyper focus on articulation, and maybe like serialism kind of gave birth to that, is to sort of hyper focus on articulation as a parameter in the music, the same way you would consider the notes themselves. So I think, articulation is a whole world in itself. So you're saying a lot of what you deal with for like the feeling of how you're playing, the volume level, the sort of the energy that you're putting into the harpsichord playing, it comes from articulations, the consonant sounds, and the quality of those consonants.
Yeah, I guess, but that feels more intellectual than what's really happening.
Right, of course. I know.
Because ultimately, like what I'm thinking is, it's just basically you're reciting a sing-song poem, right? So like a lot of things that I used to do, like you're playing a gavotte. Well, every gavotte has a kind of set rhythm. Mm-hmm. So you're not playing a gavotte if you're not feeling boo, 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 do, 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 boo, 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 right? There's your typical gavotte kind of rhythm. And no matter what the actual notes are, you're just kind of getting that. And I guess, yes, intellectually, you're thinking consonants and things like that, but really, it all kind of coalesces. It's not as, I don't want to make it feel like you're thinking about the articulation of each note, if that makes sense.
Totally. And that is a big difference, I think, between our bookends of contemporary and early music, is there is more about that sort of, and I sense that in early music players where, there's sort of that kind of let it breathe jamming aspect to it, to the way interpretation is formed and presented. Whereas in contemporary music, it's a lot of the time more about just like hyper focused, like specific parameters being kind of explored. So that's definitely an interesting difference. Well, it's been a pleasure, Francis. I really, you're a very good, wonderful friend for decades, and I love you very much. But aside from
I wish I could say the same.
Yeah.
Did
cutting it out. We're cutting that out.
We're cutting that. No. Thank you, Shi-An.
I'm gonna just say what I said again, just over your face, like in response to me, like I love you too, Shi-An. and then that's it. That's going to be the end of the video.
I'm sorry, Shi-An. I just have trouble with the L word. I can't say it. It's just how I was brought up.
I won't end it there. We'll wrap it up with a quick little, announcement going out. So again, this is a preview discussion between myself, Shi-An Costello, and Francis Yoon. And we are previewing the Keymore Festival for Contemporary Keyboard and Piano Music. And it will be taking place on December 17th at Pianoforte Studios in Chicago. And we have quite a few more previews here at the Quarantine Concerts of Experimental Sound Studio. So big thank you to Experimental Sound Studio, all the amazing people that work there and that I've known for many years as well, and really appreciate the platform to get the word out of this festival. And I hope to see anyone who might be in Chicago on December 17th at Pianoforte Studios, and you will see myself and Francis Yoon performing and participating in the festivities. So hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Francis.